You're in the right place. We're going through some of the worst 4chan threads tonight. Stories that are dark and unrelenting. These posts are real. Hit like, subscribe, lights off, and let's start. The Crisis Center in Phoenix takes voluntary admissions Monday through Friday, and I usually catch 3 or 4 intakes a week. May 2022 was slow. I remember because we were short on nurses, and the coffee machine on the second floor had been broken since April. The guy came in on a Tuesday, 26, quiet, clean shirt, brought his own bag with a toothbrush already in it, voluntary. He signed everything without reading it, which some people do when they've already made up their mind that they need help. The intake nurse said he was polite, said please and thank you, asked if he could keep his book. I'll call him Adam. That's not his name. His file was thin, no prior admissions, no medications, no history of anything except a rough year. He'd lost a job in March, moved back in with his mother in Chandler, wasn't sleeping. He told the intake nurse he was afraid he might do something he couldn't take back. That's the phrase he used. He didn't want to say the specific word out loud, and I respected that. Our first session was on Wednesday morning. He sat with his hands folded in his lap like he was in church. He answered every question. He made eye contact when it was appropriate and looked away when it wasn't. If anything, I was watching for the flatness that sometimes shows up before people go through with something. He didn't have it. He seemed present, tired, but present. Second session, Thursday. We talked about his mother. He cried a little, wiped his face with the sleeve of the hospital shirt, apologized. I told him he didn't need to. He asked if it was okay if he read his book in the common room after our sessions instead of watching TV with the others. I said of course. The book, by the way, was a beat-up paperback about lucid dreaming. I remember thinking that was interesting but not clinically relevant. Third session was Friday, May 13th. I remember the date for reasons that will be obvious. He sat down, and before I could even open with anything, he said, I had a dream last night. Is it alright if I tell you about it? I said sure. Dreams were fine. Dreams were, frankly, one of the easier things to talk through with someone in his position. He started describing an intersection, slowly, like he was reading directions off a piece of paper he'd already memorized. Northbound on 7th Street, the light where it meets Glendale Avenue, the Circle K on the corner, the palm tree that leans a little to the west because the roots pushed up the sidewalk. I know that intersection. I drive through it 4 times a week going to and from the center. I didn't say anything. I nodded and let him keep going. That's the job. He described the car. A silver Subaru Outback, older model, small dent on the rear passenger side door where someone had backed into it in a Fry's parking lot. He said the driver was a woman, brown hair pulled back, glasses she pushed up on her nose when she was thinking. A gray cardigan, a coffee cup in the cup holder from the place on Camelback with the green logo, not Starbucks, the other one. I was wearing that cardigan. My coffee cup was in the trash under my desk. My car was in the staff lot. The dent was from a woman in a Ford Explorer at Fry's in February. I kept my face doing what it needed to do. I have been doing this work for 11 years. My face knows what to do, even when the rest of me doesn't. He said in the dream, the woman was going through the intersection on a green light. A white pickup ran the red from the west. He described the pickup too. Contractor's truck, ladder on the roof rack, one of those magnetic company signs stuck to the driver's door, but he couldn't read the letters. He said the woman never saw it coming because she was looking down at her phone, which was on the passenger seat, lighting up with a text. I don't text and drive. I want to be clear about that. But my phone does sit on the passenger seat, and it does light up. Then he said the date. He said, it happens on May 17th. It's a Tuesday. The sun is bright. She dies at the scene. May 17th was the following Tuesday, 4 days out. I asked him, still level, still professional, why he thought he was having this dream. That's a standard question. You get them talking about the meaning, you learn about the patient. He said, I don't think it means anything about me. I just see them sometimes. I've seen them since I was a kid. That's part of why I'm here. I asked what he meant by them. He said, the way people go. Sometimes I know before it happens. I don't want to know. It's the main reason I couldn't keep the last job. I saw one of my coworkers and I told her and she got upset and then it happened anyway 2 weeks later. My mom made me come here because I told her I couldn't take another one. He wasn't performing, that was the thing. There was no relish in his voice, no drama. He was describing a symptom the way a diabetic describes low blood sugar. Almost bored with it, I closed the session on time. I told him I appreciated him sharing, that we'd continue on Monday, that in the meantime, he should try the breathing exercise we'd worked on. He nodded and stood up and thanked me and went back to the common room to read about lucid dreaming. I sat in my office for maybe 10 minutes without moving. Then I did the professional thing. I walked down the hall to my colleague's office, a guy who'd been at the center longer than I had, and I told him I thought Adam might respond better to a male clinician, given some of the maternal material coming up in session. He didn't push back. Handoffs happen. I signed the paperwork, and I did not put anything about the dream in the notes. I wrote that the patient was engaging well and showed insight into his symptoms. That was true. I drove home that night through the intersection at 7th and Glendale. Green light. Nothing happened. The palm tree leaned the way it always leans. On Monday, I called out sick. On Tuesday, May 17th, I took a Lyft to work. The driver was a man named Hector who talked about his daughter's quinceañera the whole way in. When I got to the center, I checked the local news on my phone twice that morning. There was a wreck on the 101 near Bell Road, but nothing at 7th and Glendale. Nothing all day. I took a Lyft home too. I drove again the following Tuesday, but I went the long way, up 19th Avenue, and cut across on Bethany home. It added 12 minutes. I did that for the rest of May, then all of June, then most of July. Sometime in August, I made myself drive through 7th and Glendale on purpose. Middle of the day, green light. I made it through and pulled into the Circle K parking lot and sat there with my hands on the wheel until they stopped shaking. I still avoided it though, not every time, but if I had a choice, I chose the other way. That went on longer than I like to admit. I stopped in October, I think. It was starting to feel superstitious in a way I couldn't defend to myself. Adam was discharged with improvement after 11 days. My colleague signed off. He got a follow-up appointment with an outpatient provider, and, as far as I know, he kept it. He never asked why I passed him off. I never told him. He walked out of the center with his paperback in his hand, and I watched him from the window of the staff room while his mother helped him into the passenger seat of her car. He looked up at the window. I don't know if he saw me. I stepped back anyway. I don't know what it was. I don't need to. I did my job. I finished the session on time. I wrote a clean note. I handed the case off for a reason I could put in writing, and I did not get in my car on May 17th. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the dream. The lift. The fact that I listened to a patient describe a silver Outback and a dent from fries and a gray cardigan, and I made a decision that a colleague of mine, if she found out, would have to write me up for. Because you don't let a patient's delusion change your behavior. That's the rule. That's day one of the training. I broke it. Quietly. Nobody noticed, and nothing happened. Which is either proof that he was wrong or proof that he was right, and I listened. I still can't tell you which. The owner wanted to know why his gas bill kept climbing every winter. 2 hours into the scan, I was standing in his hallway looking at a section of wall that had no business being that warm. I do thermal imaging for building envelopes, energy audits, moisture surveys, sometimes insurance claims. Most of it is boring in a good way. You show up with a FLIR, you walk the building, you find the cold spots around the windows and the sill plate, you write a report, you go home. January is the busy season because the delta is high enough that everything shows up clean on the camera. This was mid-January 2021, first real cold snap of the year, temperatures in the low 20s overnight. The building was a 3-story row house in Church Hill in Richmond. Brick front, wood frame back addition, built around 1910 based on what the owner told me. Marcus had picked it up in 2017 and been renovating it in phases. He lived on the top 2 floors and rented the ground floor unit out on and off, but it had been empty since the previous tenant moved out in October. I started on the 3rd floor and worked my way down. Everything was normal. Cold at the window headers, cold along the sill plate, a couple of stud bays showing thermal bridging where the insulation had settled. Standard old house stuff. I marked it up, took reference photos, moved on. Then I got to the ground floor. There's a short hallway between the kitchen and what used to be the dining room. Marcus told me it had been a butler's pantry originally, then a closet, then knocked through during the 90s renovation. On the west wall of that hallway, about 4 feet off the floor, the camera lit up. Not a warm patch, a rectangle, sharp edges, roughly 4 feet wide, 6 feet tall. The center of it was reading around 78 on the surface. The wall right next to it was 62. 16 degrees of difference on an interior wall on the ground floor of a house that had no heat source on that side of the building. I stepped back, changed the angle, switched the palette from iron bow to grayscale and back. The shape was the same. I put the back of my hand against the drywall, and it was warm, not hot, like a mug of coffee that's been sitting for a while. My first thought was a hot water line, radiator loop maybe, running through the wall from the boiler room in the basement. But hot water pipes show up as stripes on the thermal, not rectangles, and Marcus had walked me through the mechanical plan already. Nothing on that wall. The boiler and the loop were on the east side of the house. Second thought was a chimney chase. Some old houses in that neighborhood have flues running up interior walls from long-removed stoves. But a chimney chase would be masonry, and the shape would follow the brick. Not a clean rectangle with a sharp edge. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, doing math in my head. Then I moved on and told myself I'd come back to it. I came back to it 3 times. Took 11 images from different angles and distances. The shape didn't shift. The temperature didn't fluctuate. Whatever was inside that wall was pumping out steady, even heat, and had been long enough for the drywall to fully saturate. I ran a smoke pencil along the wall seams and around the baseboards. No air movement. I put my ear against it. Nothing. I called Marcus down from upstairs and showed him the screen. He squinted at the thermal image for a while and then said, "So what am I looking at?" I told him something inside that wall was generating heat. Continuous. Enough that, if I had to guess, there was an active heat source of some kind behind the drywall. I asked him if he'd ever opened that section up during the renovation. He said no. He said the guys who did the 90s work had told him that wall backed onto an old stairwell alcove that had been sealed off and packed with insulation. He'd never had a reason to touch it. I told him he should open it up. He said he'd call his contractor. I got the call 3 days later. "You need to come back and see this." When I got there, the drywall was already off. Marcus was standing in the hallway with his contractor and a Richmond PD officer. All 3 of them were looking at the wall the same way, which is to say like they weren't sure what they were looking at. Behind the drywall wasn't a stud bay. It was a room, or what passed for one, about 3.5 feet deep, 6 feet wide, and the full height of the wall. The alcove Marcus's contractors had sealed back in the 90s had been reopened at some point, and then boarded over on the hallway side, but the original access from the coat closet in the back hallway was still there, hinged, hidden behind the closet's back panel. Inside the space, a camping mat folded, a milk crate turned upside down, a small shelf, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $6, with 2 paperbacks on it, a stick of deodorant, a toothbrush standing in a plastic cup, and a phone charging cable, a 5-gallon bucket with a lid clamped on, a small electric space heater, plugged in, still running. The heater's cord ran into a mess of electrical tape at the base of the wall. Under the tape, someone had spliced it directly into a hotline coming up from the basement, upstream of the meter. That's why Marcus's electric bill had never flagged it. Whoever wired it had known exactly what they were doing. The mat was clean. The paperbacks had library stickers on the spines from a branch that had closed in 2015. One of them had a bookmark in it about halfway through. The toothbrush was dry, but the bristles were splayed like it had been used recently. The deodorant was a brand I recognized from the drugstore on the corner. Everything was arranged. Someone had taken what they needed and left what they couldn't carry. The officer asked Marcus if he wanted them to dust the space for prints. Marcus asked what the charge would be. The officer said, trespassing, technically, and theft of utilities, but there was no forced entry. The back door off the alley had been warped for years and never locked properly. Marcus knew about it and had been meaning to fix it. They dusted anyway. Nothing came back that matched anything in the system. I stood in the hallway looking at the open wall for a long time. The contractor was talking about drywall repair. Marcus was on the phone with his insurance. The officer was writing in a notebook. I kept thinking about the thermal image. The heat signature had been perfectly stable. It hadn't spiked when I walked past. It hadn't dimmed, which meant the heater was on a thermostat set to hold the space at a certain temperature. Nobody sets a thermostat on a space heater in an empty wall cavity to 68 degrees. I asked the officer when he thought the person had left. He said no way to know for sure. The mat was clean, the toothbrush recent, the heater still running when they cut power to it. On my way out, I walked past the back hallway closet. The panel was still hanging open. The heater in the wall had been running the whole time I did my scan 3 days earlier. I'd been on the 3rd floor for close to 40 minutes before I came down. I don't know if the space was empty when I walked past that wall the first time. I know the heater was set for someone who expected to come back. The job came through a broker I'd worked with maybe twice before, and both times the paperwork was clean, so I didn't push when he said the client wanted a 2-week external and internal on a small SaaS shop out of Austin. I was already in Austin, working from my apartment off South Lamar. January, cold for Texas. The AC unit outside my window ticking like it wanted attention. Standard money, standard NDA, standard scoping call. The company on the contract was a 15-person IT vendor. Website looked like every other B2B website in the world. Stock photo of a woman in a headset. Enterprise solutions, a phone number that rang through to a service. The technical lead who signed off was a guy named Ravi. Calm voice, knew his stack, gave me a proper scope document with IP ranges and out-of-scope assets clearly marked. I've seen worse from Fortune 500s. First week I did the external. Nothing crazy. A misconfigured SMTP relay. One exposed staging environment with default creds. The usual. Wrote it up. Second week I moved to internal. They gave me a VPN and a jump box and told me to go loud. They wanted noise. I went loud. Around Wednesday, I hit a subnet that wasn't in the scope doc. Not in scope, don't touch. More like it wasn't listed at all. Different VLAN, different naming convention, sitting behind a firewall that only allowed one specific management host through. I found it because that host had a stale SSH session, and someone had left tmux running. I should have stopped and emailed Ravi. That's the procedure. You find something outside scope, you stop and clarify in writing. I know that. I've told junior guys that. Instead, I told myself I'd just fingerprint it. See what it was, make sure it wasn't a customer environment I was about to break, then back out and ask. 10 minutes, 20. The subnet had 3 boxes. 2 of them were storage. One was an application server running an internal web app on a non-standard port. No login page from outside the network. From inside that jump host, it opened straight into a dashboard. The dashboard was in English, but the internal labels on some fields were transliterated. Cyrillic in the source. Not Russian only, other things too. I'm not a linguist. Field names like target_profile, movement_pattern, family_contact, device_fingerprint. I remember I was drinking a cold coffee and set it down on the desk without looking, and it hit the edge, and I had to catch it. And I remember thinking that was going to be the worst thing that happened to me that afternoon. I opened one record at random. It was a woman in her 40s. There was a photo, cropped tight on her face, clearly pulled from social media. Home address in a city I'd have to look up. Work address, a second address labeled Mother. Her commute, broken down by day of the week, which coffee place she went to on which morning, a list of the phones she had used in the last 18 months with IMEI numbers, the make of her car, the name of her partner, the school her kid went to. There was a field for her profession. It said journalist, and it named the outlet, and it was an outlet I recognized. I closed the record, opened another, man, 30s, different country, same structure. Under profession it said human rights lawyer, then another, independent reporter, third country, another, activist, fourth country. I scrolled the list view, not tens, hundreds. The most recent modified timestamp was the day before, around dinner time local to Austin. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I've thought about this a lot. It wasn't fear right away. It was this stupid slow thing where my brain kept trying to fit what I was looking at into something normal. Maybe a research dataset, maybe some threat intel product with weird labeling. Maybe I was misreading it. I stopped clicking. I sat back. The AC unit outside was still ticking. Then I noticed something small, and this is the part that actually got me. In the header bar of the dashboard, there was a little user icon and a name. My name. The account I was logged in as from the stale tmux session I'd hijacked belonged to somebody who had access to this, which meant somebody at this 15-person IT vendor with the stock photo website had access to this. Which meant the company on my contract, the one whose Ravi had walked me through the scope on a Zoom call, either ran this or hosted it, and either way they knew, and they had hired an external pen tester, me. I don't think they meant for me to find this segment. The firewall rules were clearly meant to keep it off the map. It was a mistake. Someone left the session open, and I'd walked into it, but I couldn't rule out the other red, which is that somebody wanted a second set of eyes on it, and figured a hired stranger who signed an NDA was cheaper than a real audit. I still don't know which one it was. I've made peace with not knowing. I logged out of the dashboard. I closed the SSH session cleanly. I did not run any tools against those hosts. I did not pull data. I opened a new terminal on my own machine and typed out, from memory, the structure of what I'd seen. Table names, field names, roughly how many records, the timestamp on the last update. No records, no names, just the shape of it. I put that file on a hardware encrypted drive I keep in a drawer, and I unplugged the drive. Then I made a fresh coffee and stood in my kitchen for a while and looked at the parking lot. Here's what I did in the report. Nothing. The report I sent Ravi 3 days later covered exactly what was in the scope document. The SMTP relay, the staging creds, a couple of internal misconfigurations, a recommendation for their SSO. I signed the closeout call. He thanked me. He asked if I'd be open to a follow-up engagement in Q3. I said I'd check my calendar. The invoice cleared in 11 days. I sat on the drive for about a month. I kept reading the news in the mornings, waiting to see if a name from a list I hadn't even really read would show up in a headline, and every time some journalist got doxxed or a lawyer's family got harassed, I'd feel this cold thing in my stomach and then remind myself I had no way to know if it was connected. That was the worst part of that month actually, not the drive, the mornings. Eventually, I reached out to a reporter at one of the outlets I'd recognized from that first record. Not that reporter, a different one at the same outlet, someone who wrote about surveillance. I use Signal from a burner I set up on a device I don't keep at home. I told them, in general terms, that I had seen the shape of something and could describe it but not prove it. And I sent them the schema file. No client names, no IPs, just the shape. They asked good questions. They asked careful questions. They did not push me for things I couldn't give. At some point, they stopped replying, and then a few weeks later they sent one message that said thank you, and then nothing. I don't know what they did with it. I've looked. I've searched for stories that might have come out of that schema, and I can't tell. Maybe it fed something. Maybe it sat in a folder. I stopped taking work through brokers. I don't know. I stopped taking work from small vendors with clean websites and no real footprint. I do internal red team stuff now, for one company, salaried, badge on a lanyard, boring. My old friends in contracting think I got soft. That's fine. Sometimes at night, the AC unit outside the window ticks, and I think about the timestamp. Yesterday, dinner time. Somebody was in that database while I was making dinner. Somebody is probably in it right now. I finished the job I was hired to do. I did not finish the other one. I'm aware of that. By the time I figured out what was happening, we'd already missed calls from at least 7 people who actually needed us. I want to say that up front, because the rest of this is going to sound like a story about strange phone calls, and it's not. It's a story about the phone calls that never got through. I worked overnight shifts at a crisis center off Colfax in Denver back in November of 2021, 3 blocks from the state capitol, 2nd floor of a red brick building that used to be a dental practice. 6 phones, 3 of them usually staffed after midnight. That was the whole room. The night I want to tell you about started slow. Coffee from the Keurig in the break room, the little heater under my desk making that ticking sound whenever it kicked on. Denver in November, dry cold, the kind that cracks your knuckles by Tuesday. I remember the ticking because later, that's the only thing I could hold on to. The first strange call came in around 11:40. Male voice, mid-30s maybe, said his name was Aaron. He wasn't in immediate danger, he told me. He just needed to talk. Fine. That's most of what we do. He described a breakup, then his job, then his father who'd passed the previous year. Standard stuff. But he answered every check-in question the exact right way. The wrong way is faster and messier. Real people trail off, contradict themselves, cough, breathe wrong. Aaron was clean. He would pause long enough to sound thoughtful, and then deliver something that could have come out of a training video. When I offered to do a safety plan, he engaged with every step. 42 minutes on that call. 2 seats down, Marisol was on a call that had started at 11:38. I could tell from her body language it was going the same way. Long, steady, no peak. She kept looking at me, eyebrows up, like, is your guy also strange? I nodded. 3rd seat was a newer volunteer, Jess, and Jess was on a call that started at 11:41. 3 phones lit, 3 long callers, all landing inside a 4-minute window. Then, at 12:23, all 3 calls ended, almost together. Mine first, then Marisol's, then Jess's, over maybe 90 seconds. Aaron thanked me and said he felt so much better. Marisol got the exact same line from hers. We sat in the quiet for a minute. Then the phones went off again, all 3 at once. Different voices this time, same pattern. Long, calm, sad, no imminent risk, engaged with every prompt, no rush to get off the phone. I need to explain how our system worked, or none of this makes sense. Every incoming call rings all available phones. Whoever picks up first takes it. If all 3 of us are on calls, a 4th caller hits a hold cue with a recorded message and hold music, and the phone in the supervisor's office lights up as backup. That night, our supervisor, Denise, was down the hall handling paperwork with the door closed. Around 1:15, I was on my 3rd long caller, a woman who said her name was Kate. Kate had a script too. That's the only way I can describe it. She'd give me a personal detail, wait for me to reflect it back, then give me another. It felt less like a conversation and more like she was checking boxes. While Kate was telling me about her sister in Fort Collins, I heard the supervisor's line ring in the office, once, then again a minute later. Then it stopped. At 1:32, Kate suddenly said she had to go. Love you, bye. She said love you, to me, a stranger on a hotline. Then click, I walked to Denise's office. She was on the backup phone, face gone gray, taking notes. She held up a finger. When she hung up, she looked at me and said the last 2 callers on the backup line had been real. One was a mother in Aurora. The other she wouldn't tell me about, just shook her head and said we'd talk later. That was the moment my hands started shaking. Not before, not during the weird calls, not when the pattern got obvious. Right then, standing in her doorway, hearing that our long, strange callers had been keeping the three of us on the phone while people who actually needed us had been dumped into a queue and given up, Denise handed me a bottle of water and I couldn't open it. My grip wouldn't close on the cap. I sat in her office chair with my hands in my lap and looked at the print of the Rockies behind her desk without seeing it. I went back to my seat and pulled up the call log, times, durations, numbers, if we had them. Most were blocked or spoofed 720 area codes that didn't call back when we tried. I printed everything. I sat there through the rest of the shift, and every 90 minutes or so it happened again. 3 calls in a tight window, all long, all calm, all ending together. The next morning I stayed after clockout and started building a spreadsheet. I asked Denise if I could pull the previous 6 weeks of shift data. She said yes, and she looked at me the way people look when they're relieved someone else is going to say the thing out loud. The pattern had been running since mid-October, not every night, Wednesdays and Sundays mostly, between 11:30 and 4 o'clock. When I overlaid our long caller windows against the timestamps of dropped calls and voicemails, they matched. Not perfectly, but enough. Somebody, or several somebodies, had figured out how many lines we had and were tying them up in coordinated waves. I want to be careful how I say this next part. I don't know why they were doing it. I have theories, Denise has theories. The people we eventually talked to at the field office had theories. None of us said them to each other out loud. It didn't feel useful to guess. What I can tell you is the callers weren't stupid. They knew the questions. They knew the pacing. Somebody had trained them or written material for them. One of the voices, a man calling himself Danny, used a specific phrase I'd heard in a webinar 2 months earlier, almost word for word. That was the detail that made me sit down in the break room and cry, because whoever this was had done homework on us specifically. I wrote the report over the next 4 days. Every call I could identify as part of the pattern, timestamped. Every real call that had dropped or gone to hold during those windows. I wasn't able to follow up on all of them. 2 callbacks reached family members. 1 reached a voicemail that was still just a name and a number. I don't want to say more than that. Denise took the report to the director, and the director took it to the field office. It got classified as interference with an emergency service, which is a federal thing, and past that point, I stopped being in the loop. I gave 1 long interview to a woman in a gray blazer who never uncrossed her legs and asked very precise questions in a very flat voice. She thanked me at the end and said the file would stay open. The center changed its phone system in January. Calls get scored on the fly now for risk indicators, keywords, cadence, hesitation, and the ones flagged higher jump the queue. I don't fully understand the technical side. What I understand is that a caller like Aaron, that first night, wouldn't have held all of us for 42 minutes anymore. He'd have been quietly moved to a lower priority while a mother in Aurora rang through. I wrote a short methods memo after that and sent it around to 3 other crisis lines in the region. Kansas City picked it up. So did a line in Portland. I don't know if it helped. I hope it did. I still work overnight sometimes. Coffee from the same Keurig, ticking heater under the desk. When the phones go off in 3s, I look at the clock before I pick up. That's where we seal the window shut and try to forget what was looking in. I'm grateful you were here through all of it. What story got deepest? Tell me in the comments. The archive has no bottom, no limit. Don't feel safe. I'll be back.